I've had some interest in mechanical keyboards for a bit. In high school, I was fascinated with the aesthetic typewriter keyboards, and I thought to myself, hey, maybe if I got an obnoxiously loud keyboard, it would help me focus when I write my essays for school. So I asked my parents for a mechanical keyboard for Christmas, and they came through. I got a full-size keyboard with blue switches. It wasn't anything crazy, but I absolutely loved it. A couple Christmases later, I got a 60% layout with red switches, then a couple years after that, I started binge watching videos about the hobby, and now I'm in too deep. The mechanical keyboard community is expanding rapidly, with many content creators turning their attention to keyboards and many keyboard enthusiasts creating content that catches people's attention. We'll start off by watching the god himself, Teot Types. I, on the other hand, started off with Glasses' PewDiePie keyboard videos. There's plenty to enjoy in this hobby. You learn a thing or two about techie things, you get to throw all the hunts, since nothing is ever in stock where you gotta keep your eye on group eyes. And you work towards building a keyboard that fits your desired aesthetic, sound, and typing experience. To go over keyboard anatomy, we're gonna have our first installment of Speedrun Lecture with Professor Whoever. The major components of keyboard are the case, the PCB, the switches, the stabilizers, or stabs for short, the plate, even though this is sometimes not the case, but don't worry about that, and the keycaps. Since your case houses everything, the material will affect the sound your board makes. There are also different profiles and angles for typing. Typically, a low profile case with a 5 or 6 degree angle is the most comfortable for typing, but who needs rest when you have aesthetics? The PCB is the brain of your board. You can either get one where you need to solder your switches, or you can get a hot swap. With solder boards, you need to solder your switches into the board. With hot swaps, you just need to pop in your switches and you're good to go. Hot swaps are great for convenience, and we all want to switch it up by switching out your switches frequently, although the stability from soldering with a normal board gives you the option to go plateless. I don't know why I keep bringing this up. It really doesn't matter for this video. Hot swaps could save you a lot more time and cancer in the future. Switches interface with the PCB and are a key component for a good typing and listening experience. Switches are broken into 3 categories: linear, tactile, and clicky. Linears provide a smooth and easy typing experience. Although these switches are probably your best bet for gaming, a growing number of people who find linears to be a little bland go for tactiles. Tactiles include a slight bump during a keystroke for that tactile experience. Honestly, I've never really seen clicky switches and built by choice. I feel like I might be the only person that doesn't mind them and would actually use them on purpose. Clicky switches are more taxing if you plan on doing a lot of typing, and will cause anyone within earshot to be thrown into a fit of rage, but that's fine. Stabilizers are used on bigger keys like Space Shift and Enter. Very few factory stabilizers will sound good, but the quality of your mod stabs will make or break your build. The goal is to eliminate rattle. Once you've trained your ears to hear rattle, you can't really unhear it. I don't know why, but now I have to stop myself from physically cringing when I hear bad rattle. It doesn't even matter unless you're really into keyboards. Like, you're not gonna break your fingers on a rattly keyboard. It's just an abrasive noise that I can't ignore anymore. Like the case, the material of the plate will affect the sound of the board. The plate adds more stability for installed switches, but the trade-off is stiffer typing experience that can cause fatigue if you do a lot of typing. Keycaps are usually made out of plastic such as ABS or PBT. PBT tends to be the plastic of choice because it's slightly textured, more durable, and thicker, creating more of the sought-after thog. Keycaps come in different profiles, each having their own sound and advantages. Taller keys like SA and MT3 have more thog and are recommended if you primarily use your board to type, but it can be hard for some people to adjust to them. Profiles like XC are uniform, lending itself to aesthetics but sacrifices some typing comfort. OEM profiles are the most common in stock keyboards and keycap sets. Cherry profiles are very popular amongst enthusiasts since they are sculpted and a little shorter, making them comfortable to use and great for typing and gaming. And thus concludes our lecture. I know what you're all wondering. What do I sound like in real time? Well, here you go. I'm gonna be voicing this over in real time because apparently when I edited the footage, I did not account for a voiceover. I am so sorry that this video is gonna be a little bit chaotic. I purchased the KBD75 V2 DIY kit in keycaps from KBD fans. They were running a sale because they were about to release the KBD75 V3, so of course I had to pick it up because it was on sale, and I really wanted a 75% layout. It came with a soldered PCB with the option of south-facing LEDs. I purchased it with an aluminum plate. There was a brass option, although brass does lead to a fuller sounding keyboard. It also sets your board at a higher pitch, and I'm just not really into that. This is a tray mount board, which results in a harsh typing experience. I will be addressing that later on in the video. There is a nice beefy acrylic layer for that underglow. We have standoff nubs, which might be their attempt at gaskets, screws for the board, and footies for the case. I also got dusty switch foams, adhesive switch pads. Don't do this, just get PA foam sheets. Adhesive modular plate foam, also don't do this, just get normal plate foam. Apparently it didn't occur to me to just cut foam sheets, which would have made my life so much easier, and you don't have to worry about adhering it to your board and not being able to get it off without making it an absolute mess. Moving on, here's the stab back. I got Gateron Yellows for this build with clear top and black bottom just because they're supposed to be a pretty good option if you want to go for something affordable. I also got pour-on stabilizer pads, which may or may not be necessary if you have screw-in stabilizers like what I ended up getting. Moving on to the keycaps, we have a PPT cherry profile set for about 30 bucks. Pretty cheap for PPT cherry profile set, but I'm not complaining. Didn't really mind the color scheme. Thought it was kind of cool that there was Japanese on it. I haven't really owned too many sets, and by too many I mean I haven't owned any real sets, so I'm assuming this is a decent thickness. So I ordered my soldering kit, lube, and switch key off of Amazon before I placed my order with KBD fans, since I wouldn't mind waiting for the kit if I already had all the other supplies ready. I failed to recognize just how heavily delivery services would be stressed during the pre-holiday season, so my package from Amazon came a week after my package from KBD fans, and during that time my impulsive self decided to put in all of the plate foam, switch foam, and stabilizer foam. I also failed to film any other part of the process in real time when it came to modding my switches, stabs, or soldering. And I breathed in enough cancer. Hey you, yes you, open a window, set up a fan, solder someplace with good ventilation. If there's anything I've learned in life, it's this. If it smells like it will give you cancer, it will. This part may or may not apply to you, but usually you'd start off by taking your stems and trimming off the feet. I apparently did that already at some point. These feet can cause a mushy feeling and a bit of rattle. Some you don't have to worry about that. Basically, if it's completely flat on the bottom of your stem, you're good to go. This also may or may not apply to you, but you could balance wires next. If your stabilizers come in pretty good packaging, pretty secure, lots of foam, no chances of wires bending, you really don't have to do the step, but my stabilizers came in a baggie, in a box full of other baggies. So I'm balancing the wires. Basically, you're going to put it on a flat surface where you can hear it. If you tap on it, if you hear a noise, that means it's not properly balanced. Then you can take, like I have, 2 syringes or pliers, and then use that as leverage to be able to bend your wire so that it's straight. You have to be aware of the middle of the wire and also the ends of the wire being bent. So you're just going to keep tapping back and forth until you don't hear anything, and then once that's done, make sure you keep that wire on the face that it's at. Don't flip it, otherwise you're going to have to rebalance it again. The rest of this stuff is going to apply to everyone, so you're going to start lubing your stabilizer housing. Basically what you're trying to do is prevent any rattle that may come from direct plastic to plastic content by having a little bit of lube in there. You're going to take the larger part of your housing and lube the inside walls. You especially want to pay attention to the longer side walls because that's going to have the most plastic on plastic contact. You really just want to apply an even layer, thin layer of lube. You don't need much for this section. Once you're done with that, you want to check to make sure you have a nice even sheen distributed throughout the entire inside of your housing. You don't want to see any cloudiness, otherwise that's an indicator of a little too much lube in that area. So then you're going to move on to your stem and repeat the exact same process, paying attention to the side walls that are going to make the most contact with the rest of your stabilizer, making sure there isn't too much left, just a nice sheen. At this point, you're going to start assembling your stabilizer. You're going to take the housing and look for a face with an opening in it. It's just going to be a little hole. Take note of that. That's going to be the front of your stabilizer for all intents and purposes. And then you're going to look at your stem and look for the side with 2 openings, not 1 opening, 2 openings. You're going to line that side with the 2 openings on his face with what we've decided is the front of your stabilizer housing. You have to make sure that this is done right, otherwise your stabilizer is not going to work if you flipped your stem. At this point, we're going to start applying lube to minimize rattle from the wire. This is where you're going to go a little bit heavier on the lube. So you're going to apply lube where you're going to be inserting the wire, where the wire is going to be making contact with the plastic housing. You don't need to apply it to both clip-in sections. I kind of just did that because I was stupid. It's really just important for wherever the wire is going to make contact. So apply a generous amount of lube there. And then you're going to take your wire and apply a very generous amount of lube there. The viscosity of your lube is important at this point. You're going to want to go for a mid to thicker lube. I'm using Crytox 205G0, which is all right. There's also Crytox 205G2 or Permatex. And so basically you just want to cover your entire wire that's going to be making contact with any part of the plastic part of the stabilizer, making sure that there's a lube cushion so that you minimize the amount of rattle when your wire moves. Make sure that that is evenly coated, and then you can go ahead and insert it into the bottom hole, the bottom opening of your stem. Make sure it's the bottom opening, otherwise you're gonna look like an idiot like me and it's not gonna work out if you put it in the top opening. So put it in the bottom opening, and then you can click your wire into place. You're gonna hear sort of a snapping sound. That means it's secure. Wiggle it around, test it out a bit if you want to do that. Obviously I didn't do that at this point. you're going to take your partially assembled stabilizer and start looping the other end of the wire using the same technique that you did on the other side, making sure to apply a generous amount that is spread evenly across the stabilizer. You're going to want to see obviously a little bit more cloudiness, a little bit more white if you're using something like Crytox 205G0. The more lube the better in this case. You're going to follow the same process with the housing for the other side till you get to the point where you need to assemble it fully. Once again, looking for that bottom opening in the stem, inserting it, clicking it into place. Maybe jiggle it around a bit. If it does not fully extend, that means your stem is in backwards. Make sure to double check that because it's going to be really annoying if you got through the whole process, put in your stabilizers and realize it doesn't work because your stem's flipped the wrong way. Now, I'm not going to show you how to do the holee mod, but I will advise you not to use the foam that is used for the stabilizer bottoms, because if you do that for the holee mod, it's going to be ridiculously mushy for at least a month, depending on how long you use your keyboard. Once you break it in, it's completely fine. I haven't had problems since I've broken it in. The only reason I didn't use a bandit like what you're supposed to do is because I couldn't be bothered to get up to get one. Essentially, I'm saying I was willing to sit there for 5 hours lubing switches, but I drew the line at getting up to get a band-aid. Speaking of switches, here's how I lubed my switches. I basically had my quote-unquote perfect switch, the one that I was going for when it came to sound and feel, and I kept that off to the side so I could constantly reference it as I went through the other switches. What you're gonna do is first you're gonna have to disassemble your switch by using a switch opener. I start off by lubing the bottom housing, making sure to get a nice even layer on the sliders, the bottom, around the pole, inside the pole, on the leaf, making sure all 4 walls are evenly coated. This is kind of gonna look like the stabilizers where you want a nice even coating. You don't necessarily want like a cloudy layer, but you do want to have a nice even sheen around it. It's gonna take some practice to figure out just how much lube each type of switch requires and how much lube you want for a certain feel and sound. Once I finished with the bottom housing, I moved on to the top housing. This is absolutely optional. There are a lot of people who don't lube their top housings, but I really try to pay attention to the section where the stem is going to make direct contact with the top housing. Because of the material that my switches are made out of, it made a really clacky sound that I really wasn't into, so I decided to put a generous amount of lube in that to kind of tone down the harsh clack. Next up is the spring. You really want to pay attention to applying lube at the ends of the spring. You can't apply it to the middle. I mean, more often than not, it doesn't make too much of a difference. It's a little chaotic when I lube switches, but it's fine. I sort of like how they turn out in the end. Some people are much more methodical, especially as you become experienced. You know exactly the amount of lube you should be putting in at every step, but I haven't touched switches in months, so I am relearning essentially as I film this. The next part I lube is the stem. Once again, you're going to want to go around with a nice even coating to get that nice sheen without any cloudiness. Just be aware that these are linear switches, meaning that there is no tactile bump, so I can apply lube to the legs without having to worry about changing the feel of the switch. If you're lubing tactiles, you're going to want to be careful with that, especially if you're starting out. Otherwise, you can turn your tactiles into linears by applying too much lube to the legs. But all in all, just make sure it's a nice even layer, and obviously you can always put it together and test it out to make sure you get it the way you like it. This part is completely optional. It kind of depends on the switches you have, but you can then film your switches. It's basically just a thin layer of plastic to help make your switches a little bit tighter. You can tell if your switch is loose by basically just jiggling around the stem, pressing down on the housing a little bit. In this case, I kind of just did it to be safe. I don't really have a good sense of what loose versus tight switches feel like, but a lot of people recommended lubing and foaming Gateron Yellows, so I just went ahead and did that. When you're testing your switches after looping them, you're going to be looking for feel and sound. I checked to make sure that they didn't feel too scratchy. In the case of tactiles, you want to double check to make sure you didn't over lube your tactiles if you decide to go that route. As for sound, you just want to listen out for the sound signature that you're looking for. I was going for something that was a little bit deeper, and overall you kind of just want to make sure that they're uniform across your switches. That's sort of the most important part, is getting the sound signature you like, getting the feel you like, and making sure that there's uniformity across switches. So the story of this keyboard build is not one of linear progression. I've sort of alluded to the fact that this is a really harsh keyboard to type on because of the mounting style, so after I spent some time typing away, I soon found that my fingers could not handle the force of my own typing. Those standoff nodes were doing absolutely nothing to cushion the impact, so I ended up cutting up bits of rubber band and lining the inside of the nubs, essentially creating a little O-ring. There are no words to describe the level of frustration I experienced trying to screw the board to the standoffs with nubs flying everywhere and components struggling to align. Because this board was not meant for gaskets, if you take a look at my USB port, it is absolutely not where it should be. It is very close to the top of the opening instead of being aligned with the acrylic layer. There is a tiny bit of uneven bounce now, which is very hard to see on camera. Hopefully you'll be able to see it during the sound test, but it's enough to save my fingers from themselves. Oh yeah, and I tape modded this board at some point too because it was so hollow sounding. But with all of that aside, and the board finally put together, this is what the final product looks like. I knew that this wasn't going to be a walk in the park, but I was not prepared. I was well aware that the bulk of the build would be tedious, which it was, but it wasn't that bad with a podcast or YouTube on in the background. My biggest problem was actually getting the switches to work. I'm still not exactly sure what happened. I tested the PCB right when I got it and everything was fine, and I tested it again where I was having issues, so I knew for sure the board wasn't the problem. After I finally learned how to solder properly and fixed my poor soldering job about 3 times over, there were a handful of switches that weren't working at all or weren't working consistently. I eventually got everything working and I haven't had problems since I've started using my keyboard, but I'm still not sure what happened. That being said, I'm so happy with how it turned out. Full disclosure, I filmed the sound test after using my keyboard for a few months. So if it's possible to break in a keyboard like shoes, then I most definitely did that. I don't have the most refined taste when it comes to keyboard sound tests, but I do like how the finished product turned out, especially for a first build. Enjoy! I learned a lot and this whole experience was pretty awesome. The build cost me about $250 between the kit, keycaps, extra foam and foam for mods, switch key, soldering kit, and tube of Crytox 205G0. There are lots of videos out there for doing a budget build for under $100, and if you have the means of doing so, you should try a build at least once, at least in my opinion. Crytox is crazy expensive, so I wanted to try and see if I could mix super lube oil and Permatex to make my own mixtures. So maybe I'll do another keyboard video in the future, we'll see. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. I didn't know that I type so strangely, so I'm working on some proper finger mapping now.